This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. I'm thrilled today to be joined by a brilliant leader at RSM, Matt Wolf. Matt lives sort of in the valuation space in the private equity world, just a brilliant person. Matt, take a second and tell us what you're focused on currently. What trends, what are you watching? What's going on in the PE deal world?
Yeah, happy to, Scott. Actually, yeah, a colleague of mine put together some really interesting research that we're still kind of tweaking and iterating on, but looking at sort of the growing complexity of business operations over the past 15 plus years or so. And I wanted to share a little bit about that because I think it's very relevant, especially as we look at, private equity operators, middle market, large companies, small companies, doesn't matter. Just I found these numbers to be fascinating, and I wanted to share them. And so, for example, we look at the top 50, and it doesn't really matter what we look at. We look at the top 50, bottom 50 of the S&P 500, excluding financials and real estate. So the top 50 of the S&P 500, excluding financials and real estate, the number of total suppliers those companies have now compared to 2009 has almost tripled. The number of customers those companies have now, like kind of compared to 2009, has increased over 5 times. And on the bottom end of the bottom 50 S&P 500, it's increases of 4 times and 9 times really for number of customers. And what that tells me, again, just by looking at the sort of subset of the top and bottom of the S&P 500, excluding financials and real estate, is just this explosion in the complexity of managing businesses that sort of evolved during the era of zero interest rates, and now we're all kind of coming to terms with, either as advisors or investors or as management teams, of how do we actually navigate these incredibly complex business environments, now that the cost of capital is higher. How do we do that in a way that makes returns? And we talk about that, and we've talked about it on the podcast. I think some people, at least leaders, sort of intuitively understand this, but just to see this absolute explosion in the number of suppliers and customers that companies are working with now compared to 2005, again, as much as a 9 times increase, depending on how you want to slice it, I think really kind of drives home this incredibly complex operating environment that we're all working to navigate. And that's what we're watching.
No, I think that's so fascinating. So many of the mantras I've had in founding and running businesses, and as I serve on boards and invest, is, how do you keep it simple and try and simplify amongst the complexity? And it strikes me as at one time that seemed just easier than it is today. Because it seems like the amount of variables coming at you, the changes in tech, where to pick up tech, how to meet your customers where they're at and be useful to your customers, how to grow and scale. It all seems to be more complex than it used to be. And in some ways, you used to think about the legal business as a very simple business. I'd have great clients on one side and great people on the other side. And all it was about was keeping those two things relatively in tandem. So I had enough great people serving enough great clients. And it was a relatively simple business. Hired really smart people, cultivated them, developed really close relationships, really close clients, and cultivated them, and just kept on moving them together. And then over the years, as you go up market, the clients are more complicated, the people are more complicated, the competition for both is more complicated, the changes in how people are using technology are more complicated. And this is just to talk about the professional services business, the simple business, compared to the media business or software companies and a lot of digital health companies I've invested in, and the complexity there of both getting through to the right person. In the old days, I'll give you something that brings this home to me, what you're saying, Matt, so well. In the old days, so many companies were built around point solutions. This company did this point solution better than anybody else. And it goes to your thought that you're talking about about companies running 1,000 different technologies, health systems running 1,000 different, apps to go with their 5 to 10 enterprise programs. And what's really happened in terms of simplicity, nobody wants to be running 1,000 to 2,000 apps. Thus, consequently, less and less people want a point solution. One person wants a point solution, but a system wants something that serves multiple goals, so they don't have to have and manage 1,000 different relationships. And this complexity and the need to try and trim away the complexity is, when you see great leaders, they're really, 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 really good at doing this. And that skill has become harder and harder. And so I think this operations survey that your team has put together could not be more right on. Tell us more, Matt, before I just talk and talk and talk. Tell us more.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating. I completely agree. And the other element of this is now business decisions. We're seeing clients, we're seeing operating teams, operating partners, managements, executives more closely manage those solutions, their technology stack, their vendor relationships. Can we trim the number of vendors, the number of solutions? How does that streamline our operations? But there's so many second and third order or second and third sort of derivative almost decisions that or impacts that go along with that, right? So, okay, if we reduce the number of vendors we're using in our technology stack, that probably has positive implications for our risk management, internal audit, our risk management framework, right? We're fewer entrance points to kind of manage. Maybe on the supply side, hey, we're reducing our number of vendors, reducing number of SKUs, but what if one of them goes bankrupt or one of them has supply issues? Where do we want to pay for redundancies? Where do we want to accept additional risk and have additional point solutions and have additional suppliers? What does that look like? It's made that analysis more complex. And then on the customer side, I think everybody would say, every operator, every CEO, every leader would say, "Oh yeah, we have some difficult customers, we have some difficult clients that just don't make sense for us. They're off strategy. We really shouldn't devote resources there." But push comes to shove, and if the goal is to keep dollars coming in the door, it takes a special sort of culture and leadership and frankly an investment to say, no, despite the potential short-term pain, we are exiting this segment. We are exiting this business. We are, separating from these clients. It's a very difficult thing to execute on, even if we know and we view it. The other element of the survey of the study that's been going on that I think is also really interesting is the sort of capital per employee. We looked at Russell 2000 companies, excluding financials and real estate, and what is sort of the CapEx per employee, and that has increased significantly as well. 2009, 140 grand per employee. 2024, almost $330,000 per employee. We've seen sales per employee increase as well above GDP growth. So we're seeing investments in productivity. We're seeing these investments in complexity to generate those returns. But the whole design or the whole decision space around how do we manage this complexity, even if we know it's a problem, it's still a very complex problem to navigate in its own right. So it kind of makes your head spin, really. But at least we sort of know where we stand, hopefully.
No, I think you've really hit it. And as the cost per employee goes up, the cost for CapEx goes up. All these things that go up make it harder and harder for a company that's growing to really hit the accelerator and find its product market fit, because there's just less room for error as there's more upfront and bigger expenses that go into the business. We always talk about this concept in starting a business, growing a business, is don't constantly move the goalpost. And what I mean by that is don't constantly add expenses to what you have to catch up to in profits or revenues to make it work. And what's happened is it feels like in this complex world, this expensive world, it is harder and harder to keep those goalposts in line so you could get your revenues to beat those goalposts. And so you can't move the goalposts, but it's harder and harder to control it. Matt, I love this subject, increasing complexity of business, what it means for investing, and a lot more. Matt Wolf, just brilliant superstar at RSM. Thank you for joining us today on the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. We have the great pleasure of having Matt on a webinar today with three other panelists, Holly Buckley and Bart Walker from McGuire Woods, as well as Craig Castelli from Caber Hill Advisors. So, Matt, we'll look forward to visiting with you more today as well. Thank you for joining us on the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast.
Thank you.